Whenever you are. Hi, everyone. We're going to get started with today's program. My name is Allison Lennox, and I'm the Senior Manager for Special Collections here at Toronto Public Library. And one of those very special collections is the Arthur Conan Doyle Collection, and I'm delighted to be here with all of you for the annual Cameron Hollier Memorial Lecture. We are fortunate to have Alex Hutchinson speaking about Conan Doyle's Lost World, filling in the blank spaces on the map, and I know we are all looking forward to hearing him. I should also let you know that the program today is being recorded and will be made available on the Toronto Public Library website as well as the Friends website at a later date. In addition to Alex's presentation, you'll also hear from my colleague Jessie Anello, who is the curator of the Arthur Conan Doyle Collection, as well as Cliff Goldfarb, the chair of the Friends of the Collection. We are grateful to the Friends for their work on today's event, as well as their ongoing support for the collection. I'm also thrilled that the new city librarian for the Toronto Public Library, Mo Hassini Ara, is here to welcome you all to this special event. Mo's connection to public library spans over 3 decades, including his most recent position prior to being the city librarian as Director of Branch Operations and Customer Experience for TPL. Before I call Mo to the podium, I'd like to acknowledge that the Toronto Reference Library is on Indigenous land. This is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, aka the Six Nations Confederacy, the Wendat, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Toronto Public Library gratefully acknowledges these Indigenous nations for their guardianship of this land. We'd also like to remind and reaffirm as Torontonians and Canadians our accountability to these Indigenous nations and to all Indigenous peoples and communities living in Toronto. This land is also part of the Dish with One Spoon territory, a treaty between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, aka the Six Nations Confederacy, the Anishinaabe and Allied Nations, to peaceably share and care for this land, its waters, and all of the biodiversity in the Great Lakes region. All those who come to live and work here are responsible for honoring this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. So thank you again for coming today, and I hope you enjoy this special event. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Mo Hassini Ara.
Thank you, Allison, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm here to bring greetings on behalf of both Toronto Public Library and the Toronto Public Library Foundation. Will Scott unfortunately couldn't be here, but I will be providing some remarks on his behalf. So I'm delighted to welcome you all to Toronto Public Library and to the annual Cameron Hollier Lecture in honor of Arthur Conan Doyle Collection. Since its inception, the collection has been carefully curated and now grown into one of the world's largest research collections devoted to Arthur Conan Doyle's life and works. The collection has benefited tremendously from the ongoing efforts of the Friends of the Arthur Conan Doyle Collection for 28 years now. We appreciate having such passionate ambassadors to help us develop and promote the collection. I'd like to also thank the Friends for their many years of support, including their work to organize today's program. It's a wonderful opportunity to celebrate the collection with such an engaged audience. The Friends operate under the umbrella of the Toronto Public Library Foundation, and as I said, unfortunately, Will Scott could not be here, but I'm pleased to bring some greetings on behalf of Will Scott, the CEO of the foundation. Will sends his warm regards and asked me to convey his heartfelt thanks to the Friends of the Arthur Conan Doyle Collection for your continued dedication, advocacy, and generous support. Your efforts to highlight, share, and raise funds for this unique and internationally renowned collection makes a meaningful difference. The Arthur Conan Doyle Collection is one of the gems of Toronto Public Library, an unparalleled resource for researchers, enthusiasts, and readers from all around the world. Its continued vitality is due to, in no small part, the commitment and passion of the Friends. This afternoon's Hollier Lecture is another example of the vibrant programming and community engagement the Friends make possible. Will is grateful for your work and in bringing the event to life and for nurturing the legacy of Arthur Conan Doyle and the depth and breadth of TPL's collection in such a meaningful way. Will would like to also send his thanks and to all the support for the collection. And again, as I mentioned, he wishes he could be here, but unfortunately he's tied up. And with that, I will let you get on with the program, and I hope you enjoy the afternoon.
Thank you, Mo. Good afternoon and welcome to the 24th Annual Cameron Hollier Memorial Lecture. First of all, I thank Mo for your kind words. You've been an ally to the collection for many years, and especially for the Sherlock Holmes Walk street art project. It's a mouthful. I'm Cliff Goldfarb. I'm the chairman of the Friends of the Arthur Conan Doyle Collection at, it's supposed to be the Toronto Public Library, which is true, but it's the Toronto Reference Library where we actually are housed. So this is it. This is an event that usually serves as our annual meeting. And I'm just going to take a very few moments to tell you a little bit about the Friends and what we do. If you've heard this before, you can close your eyes. So Cameron Hollier was the founding curator of the collection when it opened in 1971 at the Metropolitan Toronto Central Library on St. George Street. That's now the Koffler Student Center of the University of Toronto. And he passed away in 2000, and in 2002, to honor his memory, we established an annual lecture to celebrate and remember his career. So the Friends were formed in 1997 by a small group. We wanted to find a formal way to help the collection grow and to become an even more valuable resource for Conan Doyle scholars, for the library, and for the city of Toronto. We're an unincorporated organization. We work with the Toronto Public Library Foundation, who provide us with a home and support. We also receive great support from the American Foundation for the Toronto Public Library. We work with the library to enhance the collection and to act as a resource for the library on issues that may come up. And we have some expertise among our members, and that expertise is often devoted to helping the collection find things and explain things. We try to raise funds to purchase rare items for special projects and to enhance the collection and its facilities. And I know Jesse will tell you that from time to time we help for the library to purchase something for which funds would not have been available otherwise. So that's part of our accomplishment. We work to raise public consciousness of the collection, and we act as a resource together with the library staff and dealing with other public and private collections. The most visible result of this, of course, is the wonderful art project on Sherlock Holmes Walk, just outside. We work with the local Sherlock Holmes Society, the Bootmakers of Toronto, and we work with other organizations worldwide to promote the appreciation of Arthur Conan Doyle and his works. We're one of the few societies in the world dedicated to Sir Arthur Conan Doyle rather than to his most famous creation. Our members come from literally all around the world. We publish 3 issues of The Magic Door each year. The current issue is going to be published in a few days, and we have some sample copies here that you can take home with you if you want to see what we do. We also, I want to thank the editor of The Magic Door, Tom Yu, who has really brought this to a level of excellence that he maintains, and it's now considered to be one of the leading publications about Conan Doyle in the world. So please help yourself to a copy or two so you can see what we do. Each fall, we publish the previous year's annual Hollier Lecture, and we send it to all of our supporters. In December, we'll be sending out our last year's lecture by Ray Betzner, Born in a Toronto Bookshop, Vincent Starrett, and the World of Sherlock Holmes. Today's lecture is going to be published next year. Again, we have some pamphlets from previous lectures. Feel free to take one. We'll give you an idea of just how interesting what the things that we do and publish are, hopefully. Since 2020, our lectures have been recorded, and you can watch them on our YouTube channel. And if you need to get there, just go to our About Us page and follow the links. This lecture will be posted in a few weeks. If you want, there's also information over there on how you can join today if you'd like, or you can take one of the cards and go online and do it. We help the collection to purchase items which are not within its budget. We've purchased or contributed to the purchase of several important additions to the collection, and we're always interested in receiving gifts or bequests for which the foundation can issue a charitable tax receipt. If you'd like to join me after the lecture, I'm going to be giving an informal tour of the Conan Doyle street art project on Sherlock Holmes Walk. We'll give you more details. We work with the American Foundation for the Toronto Public Library to offer our American friends the opportunity to receive charity tax treatment for their gifts. The American friends, and especially their past president, Glenn Moranker, have helped us to make major manuscript purchases for the collection. And I also want to thank Les Klinger, who is probably the world's most famous annotator, who's always supportive of the collection and the Friends. We lost two good friends in the last 12 months. Doug Rigglesworth on the left, who was our co-founder and our first chairman, passed away in December 1, 2024. He was the inspiration for almost everything that the Friends do. He often gave me his strong opinions about the role of a chairman, and I'll miss him. Doug Elliott, who was also one of our founding members, who created our website and maintained it from his home in retirement in Australia, passed away on August 26. He was a good friend to all of us, and I'm going to miss his calm and rational advice. I want to thank the members of our executive who work behind the scenes to carry out our activities. Thanks to our Vice Chair, Barbara Rush, our Secretary and Merchandise Chair, Philip Elliott, Treasurer Peter Chant, and our Membership Secretary, Kathy Burns. Again, to thank Tom Yu, who's the editor of The Magic Door. Mike Ranieri, who's the head of the Bootmakers of Toronto, our local Sherlock Holmes Society, helps us in many ways, including graphic design. Thank you to the Toronto Public Library Foundation, especially Will Scott, its president, and Lisa Fernandez, and all of its hardworking staff for all of the material support and encouragement they give us. And believe me, it's very much appreciated. And finally, thank you to the Special Collections staff who are responsible for our wonderful Arthur Conan Doyle Collection. So Alison Lennox, Manager of Service Development, Special Collections. Peggy McFarland Purdue, our former curator, who's now Senior Department Head of Special Collections, for their constant advice and support. And our curator, Jessie Amalo, who you'll hear from in a minute, for the enthusiasm and skill she brings to her position every day. You can visit us on our Facebook page. There's always a lively discussion or two, and our YouTube channel where this lecture will be posted in the next few weeks, and you can find both from the links on our website. I invite you to consider becoming a member of the Friends. You can find all the information on our website at www.acdfriends.org. Just click on Become a Friend. You can also find us from the link on our Facebook page. And I've left some membership forms and some cards over here with information. Again, this lecture is being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel in a few days. There will be time for Q&A at the end of the lecture. If you ask a question, you're agreeing that your voice, but not your image, will be part of the recording. And now I'd like to invite Jessie Amalo, our curator, to come up and give some information.
Hello, everyone. It has been a while since we have met in person, so it's great to see you all. I'm sure most of you already know who I am, but just in case, I'll go over it again. My name is Jessie Amalo, and I'm Services Specialist and Curator of the Toronto Public Library's Arthur Conan Doyle Collection. I'd like to take this opportunity to share some updates from the past year. I'll start with the digital archive. I wanted to start by highlighting the Toronto Public Library's digital archive. Digitizing material from the Arthur Conan Doyle Collection allows us to preserve materials while also making them widely accessible to our users. In recent years, we have prioritized digitizing original manuscripts from the collection because, as they are primary source material, they have tremendous research value to our users. A simple search of the digital archive will render users with nearly all manuscript materials found in the collection. Additionally, this year we have added to our digital archive many images from the Toronto Public Library archives, which document decades of history of the Arthur Conan Doyle Collection. From the early days and opening of the collection through past events, many images document the people and materials that have helped build this world-renowned research collection. To access the Toronto Public Library Digital Archive, please visit tpl.ca/digital archive to begin your search. We are constantly adding new material to the archive, so there is no shortage of material to explore. All right, new acquisitions. Every year we work to build our collection through acquisitions. The following are some highlights from the past year. A rare 1946 movie memorabilia large format press book for the Universal Pictures film Dressed to Kill, partly based on the short stories The Adventures of the Sixth Napoleon and A Scandal in Bohemia by Arthur Conan Doyle. The brochure features cast and credits, film story, and advertising. Another is the White Company treatment script for an unproduced film based on the novel by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, a work of historical fiction taking place during the 100-Year War. Written by screenwriter Howard Clews for Sir Nigel Films circa 1960. An original 19th century sepia photograph of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle posing with cane and top hat. Unsigned and undated, the photograph once belonged to the Harold Seaton Photograph Collection. 2 sets of the 2025 Sherlock Holmes Lego Book Nook bookshelf decor kits representing Baker Street and featuring the characters of Holmes, Watson, Irene Adler, Professor Moriarty, and an irregular. The recent 2024 edition of the Edinburgh University Press Works of Arthur Conan Doyle, the Stark Monroe Letters. The editions are scholarly editions covering the author's entire career. And 2 fine press books from Griffin Editions produced in 2025, including Conan Doyle's Tales of Medical Humanism and Values, Round the Red Lamp, and the Medical Casebook of Dr. Arthur Conan Doyle, From Practitioner to Sherlock Holmes and Beyond by Alvin E. Roden. Additionally, the collection has welcomed many new items, including editions of Doyle's works, pastiches and imitation stories, biographies and critical analysis texts, graphic novels, multilingual editions, rare periodicals, ephemera, and collectibles. And finally, I would like to touch on donations. We are very fortunate at the library to have the Friends of the Arthur Conan Doyle Collection, a group of members that support the collection in so many ways. One of the ways they offer support is through generous donation. I will start with a very exciting and generous gift from the Friends that was acquired this year. It is a rare film script for the 1945 film The Woman in Green. The script was written by Bertram Milhauser and is based on the Sherlock Holmes stories by Conan Doyle. This script belonged to executive producer Howard Benedict and is filled with pencil notes and annotations. This year, we also received about a dozen Sherlock Holmes artist books created by Australia's Durham Groves, donated by the artist. An artist book is a book created as a work of art showcasing the artist's creativity. These books make reference to many of the Holmes stories and characters. And finally, this year, we saw the loss of 2 great friends of the Arthur Conan Doyle Collection. Doug Elliott of Australia was a member of the Friends since the group's founding days. Living in Toronto when the group started, he later moved to Australia, where he worked to maintain the Friends of the Arthur Conan Doyle Collection website remotely. An avid collector, he amassed a great collection of materials related to Doyle. Earlier this year, he approached me about a donation, and we were able to add many of his items to the collection. In particular, he had a sizable collection of items related to Conan Doyle's The Lost World, which we were missing, and that he gifted to the collection. Doug Wrigglesworth, a former chair of the Friends of the Arthur Conan Doyle Collection, had one of the most extensive book collections I had ever had the pleasure of seeing, with an entire floor-to-ceiling wall of materials dedicated to Conan Doyle. Doug's family was in touch earlier this year and donated a significant portion of his collection to the library. Notably, he had a considerable amount of multilingual Sherlock Holmes texts that we did not have, which were gifted to the collection. Doug Elliott and Doug Wrigglesworth were both passionate collectors of Conan Doyle and tireless in their work with the Friends over the years in promoting and expanding the Arthur Conan Doyle Collection. Their donations will add greatly to the scope and value of the collection. We are very grateful for all they have done. If you are interested in seeing rare treasures from the collection, I would invite you to join me in visiting the Arthur Conan Doyle Collection later today after the lecture, located on the 5th floor of the library in the Marilyn and Charles Bailey Special Collection Center. Thank you.
Thank you, Jesse. I'd like to invite Danielle Goldfarb to come up and introduce our speaker.
Thank you so much. I am actually Cliff Goldfarb's daughter, if everybody. So in addition to being Cliff's daughter, I'm actually a longtime friend of our speaker, Alex Hutchinson. And I'm really, really happy to introduce him. Alex is a best-selling science journalist, and I have been lucky to know him since we were in grade 7. So I've followed him throughout his life and career. Today, Alex is going to talk about Arthur Conan Doyle's fascination with the blank spaces on the map and how that idea connects to the theme of exploring, which is the subject of his latest book, The Explorer's Gene, which I think there's some copies of if you want to pick up a copy later. And it's called The Explorer's Gene, Why We Seek New Places, New Experiences, and the Unknown. So Alex's book looks at the science behind why some people are especially driven to go to those blank spots, why they are driven to take on the big challenges or explore new ideas. And Alex is especially credible on this particular topic because he's both a scientist and also he basically has lived his life taking on many, many big challenges. So he is one of those people that is driven to take on these big challenges. And so I was in middle school, high school, and even went to the same universities as Alex. So I sat next to him. I don't know if you remember this, Alex, but I did sit next to him in high school physics class. And it was one of the many subjects that he was very good at. And so I wasn't surprised that he went on to become a physicist. And he went on not just, to be a casual physicist, he went and got a PhD in physics from Cambridge. Then he went and did a postdoc with the US National Security Agency on quantum computing and nanomechanics. And then just when he was at the sort of top of his game on physics, he decided, okay, let me try something completely different. And he went back to school and started again. He went back to school to become a journalist. And again, not so surprising to me. I actually remember, him getting like 100% on an English essay once and thinking like, I didn't even know you could get 100% on an English essay. And then I haven't even spoken about what he did in his spare time, which is his passion for running. So again, Alex didn't do it casually. He pursued running to really the highest levels of performance, becoming a member of Team Canada in middle and long distance running. And so, I mean, he really has lived this kind of a pursuit of the big challenges in life. And what I think is really amazing is that he has now figured out a way to combine these passions. So his passion for writing, his passion for science, and his passion for sport and the sort of highest levels of what humans can do in terms of sport and exploration. And he's turned that into an amazing career as a science journalist. And so his focus as a science journalist is on the science of human performance and exploration. His previous book, Endure, which you should also pick up a copy of, it became a New York Times bestseller, and it's really on the science of endurance and how endurance is not just about the body, but it's really about our minds and how our minds actually impact our limits in terms of what we can do in terms of our performance. You may also have read Alex's column at various times in the Globe and Mail. He has a column on the science of sport, and he has also won many awards for his writing. For example, he won an award for adventure travel writing for a piece in the New York Times. So, and that's related to today's theme of finding the blank spots on the map. So it's really my pleasure to turn it over to Alex now to give us his take on Conan Doyle's Lost World, filling in the blank spaces on the map. I hope I didn't embarrass you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it. And thank you, Danielle, for the very nice introduction. I do remember high school physics. So yeah, my name is Alex Hutchinson. I'm going to be talking today about Conan Doyle's Lost World, filling in the blank spaces on the map. And so Danielle gave you a rather detailed background on who I am, but I want to flesh out a little bit more, not just who I am, but how I ended up on this podium here in front of you today. So yeah, I'm a science journalist. I would describe the theme of my work as human performance. So I write a lot about fitness and health and adventure and things like that, but also about psychology and neuroscience. So I'm interested in how the body works and how the mind works and how those two things work together. And so that is what sort of fueled the book that I published earlier this year, which is called The Explorer's Gene, Why We Seek Big Challenges, New Flavors, and the Blank Spots on the Map. And the goal in this book was to try and understand why we're drawn to the unknown, why we don't just sort of keep doing the same thing over and over again, but always seem to seek out new ideas, new challenges. So I published this book in 2025. In 1912, Arthur Conan Doyle published a book called The Lost World. And it's probably, I think it's fair to say, it's his most famous book outside of the Sherlock Holmes stories. And in this book, so for those who haven't read it, The Lost World is basically about an expedition to the deepest, darkest, unmapped heart of South America, where they discover a remote plateau where dinosaurs and other creatures have survived to the modern day. And at the beginning of this story, the narrator, a young reporter named Ned Malone, is trying to convince his editor to send him on this trip. And the editor is skeptical. He says, "Dear me, Mr. Malone, this is very exalted. I'm afraid the day for this sort of thing is rather past. The expense of the special mission business hardly justifies the results." And so I can say this scene rings true. There are many freelance journalists today who can attest, who have heard these words, that the expense hardly justifies the results hardly justify the expense. But so McCardle is skeptical, and he goes on to say, "The big blank spaces in the map are all being filled in, and there's no room for romance anywhere." And so this is 1912, and so when Cliff Goldfarb saw the title of my new book, talking about why we see big challenges, new flavors in the blank spaces on the map, he thought of Conan Doyle lamenting the decline of blank spaces, and he wondered whether there might be some themes that overlapped. And so that's what I'm going to talk about today, is how the ideas that I was exploring in The Explorer's Gene about our desire to explore coincide with some of the themes, not just in Arthur Conan Doyle's work, but also in his life. And there's three particular themes that I want to talk about. One is these blank spaces that I just mentioned. Why are we drawn to them, and are they disappearing? The second idea is the concept of armchair exploring. If the blank spaces are all gone, can we still explore the world meaningfully with our minds? And the third idea is the idea of, air quotes here, useless knowledge. When we explore, do we have to be looking for something specific or looking for something useful? Or if we just follow our instincts, do we end up discovering useful things that will be useful in the long run? So starting with the first one, the blank spaces on the map. As I said, Conan Doyle's writing about it in 1912 in The Lost World. It's worthwhile, I think, to start by thinking about the world that Conan Doyle was living in at that time when he was writing The Lost World. So 1909 is a famous year in exploring. It's what the historian Eric Larson has called it was the race for the three poles. So on the one hand, Robert Peary reported that he had reached the North Pole in 1909. He wasn't the first to claim this. Frederick Cook said he had reached it before, but people didn't believe him. And these days, I would say most historians don't think Robert Peary actually reached the North Pole. But be that as it may, in 1909, it was announced that the North Pole had been reached. That blank spot had been mapped. And regardless, 2 years later, or actually it was, I guess, about 15 years later, the North Pole was reached by Amundsen. The other, another pole, the South Pole, same year, 1909, this was Ernest Shackleton's, probably his most successful expedition. Not his most famous. His most famous ones were disasters. But in 1909, Shackleton he didn't make it to the South Pole, but he got to within about 100 miles. And this was a new record for the farthest south that a human had ever reached. Now, the third pole is, it's not the East Pole and it's not the West Pole. It's the highest point on Earth. And we're still several decades away from humans climbing Everest. But in 1909, a guy named Luigi Amadeo, the Duke of the Abruzzi, led an expedition to K2, which we now know is actually the second highest mountain on Earth. And he didn't make it to the top of K2. That's very hard. But he made it higher than anyone else had ever previously made it. He made it about 7,500 meters above sea level. And that set a record that stood for more than a decade. So this is what's going on in 1909. The final blank spaces, these three poles, are, if not being reached, are being approached very closely. And Arthur Conan Doyle is a big fan of these expeditions, and he corresponds and is acquainted with a whole bunch of explorers, including Robert Peary and Ernest Shackleton. So, and in fact, when Robert Peary comes through town after his expedition, comes through London, he meets Conan Doyle. In fact, so this is from the Times in 1910. A complimentary luncheon was given yesterday to Commander Peary at the Royal Societies Club. They say there's no such thing as a free lunch, but if you make it to the North Pole or claim you did, you can get a complimentary luncheon. And at this complimentary luncheon, Conan Doyle is asked to give a toast on behalf of literature. So and the Times reports in great detail, it was quite a long toast. But among the things he said is the writers of romance had always a certain amount of grievance against explorers. It was the grievance that explorers were continually encroaching on the domain of the romance writer. Laughter and cheers, thank you. There had been a time when the world was full of blank spaces, and in which a man of imagination might be able to give free scope to his fancy. But owing to the ill-directed energy of their guests and other gentlemen of similar tendencies, these spaces were rapidly being filled up. So this is 1910, sorry. And so in 1912, when Conan Doyle writes in The Lost World about the blank spaces being disappearing, he's giving voice, McArdle is giving voice to his own feelings that the final blank spaces on the map are being filled in, and there's less room for romance than there once was. Now, Ernest Shackleton also came through London after his expedition. The Royal Societies gave a luncheon yesterday in honor of Mr. Ernest H. Shackleton. It doesn't specify whether this one was complimentary, but we can assume that he didn't have to pay. And once again, Conan Doyle is asked to give a toast. And this time, what he says is, Sir Conan Doyle proposed the toast of the Royal Societies Club and said it was often asked in this utilitarian age, what is the good? As if every noble deed were not its own justification. So he's asking something slightly different here, because this age of exploration is different from the great age of exploration when Columbus was sailing across the Atlantic. Of course, he wanted to map the blank spaces, but he also wanted to find a lucrative trade route to the East Indies. And in general, a lot of the great exploration, there's mixed motives. You might want to map the blank spaces, but you also want to find a gold mine or find some other way of getting rich. Now we're going to the North Pole and the South Pole on the top of K2 or top of Everest. There are no gold mines there. There's no rational reason to fill in these blank spaces. So Conan Doyle is acknowledging that as these explorers head off and possibly quite often die in pursuit of these very difficult to reach locations, that one might ask, what is the good? And he's saying, well, I mean, every noble deed is its own justification. And this is a debate and a version of the answer that is quite common at the time, and probably the most famous exposition of this. It comes a decade later from George Mallory. Mallory was one of the guys on the early British expeditions to Everest, on the first three. And before the third expedition to Everest in 1924, the expedition on which he in fact died, a reporter from the New York Times asked Mallory, why did you want to climb Mount Everest again? What's the point? And Mallory says, well, because it's there. And so this is a very, very famous answer. We remember it a century later, not because it's a good answer. In fact, it's not a very good answer. It doesn't tell us anything, but a bad answer. We remember it because it captures what's so sort of hard to put into words about why we're attracted to these blank spaces. So this is basically the question that I started with when I started working on the Explorers Genome. Why do we want to go to these places? There's no gold mines there. What is exciting about going to where no one has gone before? Is this wired into us? Is this something essential about the human condition? And this is the question that Conan Doyle is asking, or trying to avoid asking when he gives a toast to Shackleton. So is this wired into us? One way to answer that is to look back at patterns of human migration over the years. So humans arose in Africa, and for several 100,000 years, they made little jaunts up into the Near East, into Europe, even into Asia, and then back into Africa, and then back into Europe, and back into Africa. But they didn't really travel very far. Something changed about 50,000 years ago. All of a sudden, at that point, humans spread rapidly around the world in the course of a few tens of thousands of years, in the course of a very short period of time, relatively speaking. And they made it to the southern tip of South America. They settled every island and every habitable island in Polynesia. They made it to the Canadian Arctic, which we know is quite a challenging place to live. And it's more than just, things got crowded or they ran out of resources. You don't make it to Easter Island across 4,000 kilometers of open ocean because it's a little too crowded in Tahiti. So, Why is this? What drives it? There's a quote from a guy named Svante Pääbo, who won the Nobel Prize a few years ago for his work on ancient DNA, which is one of the things that helped trace these roots of ancient migration. And he said, look, no other mammal moves around like we do. We jump borders. We push into new territory, even when we have resources where we are. There's a kind of madness to it. Sailing out into the ocean, you have no idea what's on the other side. And now we go to Mars. We never stop. Why? So this is Conan Doyle's question. This is my question in the explorer's gene. What is the reason? Well, one way to explain it is to say the dopamine made me do it. I'm looking for a hit of dopamine in the same way that I can't stop scrolling social media because I'm looking for my hit of dopamine. And so we hear a lot about dopamine these days as a sort of pleasure chemical that we're pursuing when we scroll social media or whatever. Scientists have actually known since the late 1980s, that that's not quite the right picture. Dopamine, we don't get a hit of dopamine when something is good. We actually get a hit of dopamine when something is better than we expected. Dopamine is a marker of prediction error. So, for example, if you take a drug for the first time and you get a really good feeling, your brain will give you a hit of dopamine as a sort of bookmark to say, this was better than you expected. You should do this again. But if you take the exact same drug for the 10th time, there's no more prediction error. You know exactly what to expect. So you won't get a hit of dopamine, and you'll feel drawn to do something different, something else, to try a bigger dose or try a different drug. So that's a negative aspect of dopamine, same thing that kind of drives our social media behavior. But you can see how it also is very tied to the idea of exploration. Because if you want to get a feeling that something is different or better than you expected, you should go to the blank spots on the map where you don't know what to expect, because you will definitely have prediction error because you don't know what to predict. So we have a bunch of different dopamine receptors in our brain. One of them is called the DRD4 receptor. And about 50,000 years ago, a new version of the DRD4 receptor started to appear in humans. And that variant still exists today. Some people have it and some people don't. Those who have the explorer's version of the DRD4 gene, when they go to ski resorts, they're more likely to ski out of bounds. They're more likely to develop problem gambling habits. In general, they're more likely to seek out novelty, to try new foods, and go new places and things like that. So if you go back to this picture of human migration, you can go around the world and take DNA samples from populations around the world and try and figure out what proportion of people in this place have the explorer's version of the gene. And what you find is that the farther that group had to migrate from its origins in Africa, the higher the proportion of people have the explorer's version of the gene. So if you look at the San in Southern Africa, none of them have the explorer's version of the gene. In Sardinia, you might find 10 or 15%. In indigenous people in Japan, you might find 20 or 25%. If you go to South America, you've got populations that have 80 or 85% have the explorer's version of the gene. So this is kind of a smoking gun that our wiring, the dopamine circuitry in our brains, it compels us to, or encourages us to seek out new places, to find out what's over the horizon. Now, it's important to specify, this doesn't mean that some of us are born to explore and others aren't. We all have DRD4 receptors. We all respond to this prediction error signal in our brains. In some of us, it just is turned up a little bit louder than in others. And we can speculate that Arthur Conan Doyle is probably one of those people who had an unusually strong draw and probably had the explorer's version of the DRD4 gene. Not just based on his work, but based on his life. He was, for example, a tireless traveler. He traveled all over the world. This is actually a picture from the Arthur Conan Doyle Collection here in Toronto from their digital repository of Conan Doyle in Jasper National Park, which was new at the time. He took a train trip across Canada on the CPR, got to Jasper, did some picnics there, and then he actually, not just went to Jasper, he took a trip on the Athabasca Portage, which was a historic Hudson's Bay Company portage from Edmonton to Athabasca. So he explored Canada. He took his family, he took his kids to Sri Lanka. Here he is in the Blue Mountains of Australia, roaming through the ruins of Pompeii, learning to cross-country ski. So Arthur Conan Doyle was a sort of exemplar of the kind of person who really wanted to see everything, do everything, visit everywhere. And this is maybe a stronger or an extreme example of an instinct that I think is in all of us to some degree, expressing itself in different ways, the desire to see new things. Now, there's one other point I want to make about this idea of blank spots. When I talk about blank spaces on the map, you're probably thinking about paper maps or digital maps, but we also make maps in our brains. In a region of the brain called the hippocampus, we form cognitive maps, and these are literal maps of the spaces we move through and inhabit. So if you walk through a room, there'll be specific neurons that light up every time you're at a specific coordinate, a specific place in a room. So you could, if you're watching the neurons fire, you will see a map traced out in your hippocampus. So we map spaces in our hippocampus. And this was work that got a Nobel Prize, work in the 70s, discovered cognitive maps and got a Nobel Prize for that. But what's interesting and been realized more recently is that we also map ideas in our hippocampus. So using exactly the same part of the brain and exactly the same process, we map, for example, our social networks. So in our hippocampus, we will store all the people we know and how far away or close to us they are on different axes like power or proximity, and how close they are to each other. So we have a three-dimensional map of our social networks. And we'll also map other ideas more generally, how they fit together, how close they are to each other, whether they're related to each other, whether there are shortcuts. And so Conan Doyle's time wasn't just a time where the blank spots on the physical map was being filled in. It was also a time of very rapid advance in science, quantum mechanics, evolution, all sorts of big ideas were starting to explain the world. And there was maybe a sense that the blank spots on the intellectual map were also being filled in. And so you have sentiments expressed throughout the Holmes stories, like from his last vow, Holmes says, "Life is commonplace, the papers are sterile, audacity and romance seem to have passed forever from the criminal world." So Holmes here is wishing that criminals would give him a little more prediction error, that there would be some surprises, some blank spaces, that it wouldn't just be the same old crimes over and over again. And not to be too speculative, but you can sort of think about Arthur Conan Doyle's interest in spiritualism, his desire to communicate with the spirits of the dead. That he started out training in science as a doctor, but he really wanted there to be some unknown. He lamented the disappearing blank spots and wanted there to be some areas of intellectual life where we didn't know what was going to happen. So that's the idea of blank spaces, both the idea that they're disappearing and that we're drawn to them. The idea that we map ideas, that the blank spaces aren't just physical but cognitive, is a kind of a segue into my next topic, which is this idea of armchair exploring. Can we meaningfully explore the world from the comfort of an armchair? So in the 5 Orange Pips, Sherlock Holmes gives a very famous definition of the ideal reasoner. He says the ideal reasoner would, when he had once been shown a single fact in all its bearings, deduce from it not only all the chain of events which led up to it, but all the results which would follow from it. So he goes on to say, problems may be solved in the study, which have baffled all those who have sought a solution by the senses. So this idea of an ideal reasoner, it's something that's in the scientific zeitgeist in the 1800s. So in the early 1800s, Pierre-Simon Laplace proposes something that's come to be known as Laplace's demon, which is the idea that if you knew the position and momentum of every particle in the universe, you could trace back the entire history of the universe and predict the entire future of the universe. And this idea sort of floats around and pops up in various interesting places throughout the 1800s. And one of the places that shows up, surprisingly, is in ophthalmology, in the study of vision. So Arthur Conan Doyle was, in fact, an ophthalmologist. He was, I don't know if he was a good ophthalmologist. He wasn't a successful one. He apparently spent many long hours sitting in his consulting rooms wishing that a patient would show up. But he trained as a doctor. He started out in general practice, was not particularly successful in that capacity either, and eventually was convinced that the way to success was to specialize in the eye. And at a certain point, he gives up his practice, starts specializing in the eye. He goes to Vienna for a few months to meet the eminent people in ophthalmology. That's the center of ophthalmology at the time. He's attending lectures at the Krankenhaus, which I assume is some ophthalmological thing. And he goes to Paris and meets an eminent ophthalmologist there and decides that he wants to learn everything about the eye. Now, what is he hearing when he goes to Vienna to learn about ophthalmology? Well, one of the big figures in ophthalmology at that point was a guy named Hermann von Helmholtz. Helmholtz was a polymath who made a lot of contributions in different areas of science, including physics. One of them was ophthalmology, or in the study of vision. He invented the ophthalmoscope, which I may or may not be pronouncing correct, but it is the instrument that allows doctors to look inside your eye. And when you go to the doctor today, they will, if they look in your eye, they're using an ophthalmoscope, which is essentially to the same design that Helmholtz came up with in the mid 1800s. And this is really like the single biggest development in ophthalmology. There's two, if you look at histories of ophthalmology, there's like before the ophthalmoscope and after the ophthalmoscope. So Conan Doyle goes to Germany at a time when ophthalmology has just been revolutionized. And von Helmholtz also had a book that he published called, a very influential book called The Handbook of Physiological Optics. And, I don't know what Conan Doyle, what lectures he did or didn't attend, but I'm fairly confident that he would have been exposed to the ideas of Hermann von Helmholtz. And one of the ideas in the Handbook of Physiological Optics, there's an idea that Helmholtz proposes that is briefly popular and then disappears for a century and is now actually, I'll explain in a moment, is a very significant idea in our understanding of the brain. But it's an idea about how the brain and the senses are related to each other, how the brain relates to the eye. So our intuition is that our eyes function basically as video cameras. We're looking around the world, we're taking in information about what's around us, and we take that information and send it to the brain, and the brain makes sense of what we're seeing. And what Helmholtz suggested, and he suggested this to explain certain types of optical illusion, is he said we have it backwards. Actually, it's not that we take all this information from the eye and send it to the brain. We start in the brain trying to predict the world, and then we send those predictions to the eye and to the other senses. And we just use our senses to basically check, is our prediction right? And we send a little signal back saying, yep, you got it, or nope, not quite. You need to update your predictions in the following way. And so this is essentially the idea that this leads to Holmes's idea of the ideal reasoner. In modern cognitive science, this is an idea known as predictive processing. In the last 15 years or so, this idea that the brain is a prediction error, a Helmholtzian brain, has become the dominant view on how the brain works and what the brain is for. In this view, the goal of the brain is to predict the world. We just use our senses to check those predictions. And so the brain is trying to reduce prediction error to zero. The brain wants to be able to know what's going on in the world and not be surprised. That will maximize our chances of surviving. So you can see this idea at work throughout the Holmes story. So if you look at the Silver Blaze, there's a famous passage where Inspector Gregory says, "I cannot think how I came to overlook it," with an expression of annoyance. And Holmes says, "Oh, it was invisible, buried in the mud. I only saw it because I was looking for it." And he goes on to say, "See the value of that imagination is the one quality which Gregory lacks. We imagined what might have happened, acted upon the supposition, and find ourselves justified." So Holmes is saying, we didn't just go looking for clues blindly and then try to make sense of them. We tried to predict what's going on in the world, and then we just use our senses to confirm, oh yes, there is a matchstick in the mud there, just as I imagined there would be. Now there's a bit of a tension here between the image of Holmes as the super clue gatherer who's crawling back and forth through the grass and finding obscure cigarette ash, and the image of Holmes as this ideal reasoner who's sitting in his armchair and just deducing what must be happening in the world. And this tension between those two visions of Holmes actually mirrors a tension or a sort of paradox that emerges in the modern version of cognitive science of predictive processing, and it's called the dark room paradox. So the thing about predictive processing, if our brains are designed to predict the world and try to reduce prediction error to zero, then that suggests we should hate exploring. It suggests that what we should do is head into a closet, turn out the lights, lock the door, and stay there, because then we will be able to predict perfectly what is going on in the world around us. Nothing's going on, so our prediction error is zero. And this darkroom paradox was published about 15 years ago, and it really roiled the waters of cognitive science for a little while. And over the next few years, people debated what the resolution was. And the resolution turns out to be that we don't just want to predict what's happening right now. we want to predict what's going to happen in the future. And so if you adjust your equations to say we want to minimize prediction error, not just now, but in the future, what you find is the equations then say, actually, we do want to open the closet door, head out into the world, and actually preferentially seek out the paths that we know the least about. We want to seek out the unknown because that will have the greatest potential to teach us about the world. And if we learn about the world, we'll be able to make better predictions about what's going to happen. So this, I think, is a way of thinking about how Holmes, the ideal reasoner, coexists with Holmes, the clue chaser. He wants to be able to predict the entire world with his brain, but to do that, he needs to go out and seek out what he doesn't know in order to be able to make better predictions. So that's the idea of armchair exploring. Last theme I want to talk about is quote unquote useless knowledge. So early in the Holmes canon, in A Study in Scarlet, there's a very famous scene where Watson realizes that Holmes doesn't know that the Earth goes around the sun. And for such a smarty pants, this seems like a surprising thing. And Holmes explains, look, I consider that a man's brain is like a little empty attic, and you have to stock it with such furniture as you choose. It is of the highest importance, therefore, not to have useless facts elbowing out the useful ones. But the solar system, I protested. What the deuce is it to me, he interrupted impatiently. You say that we go around the sun. If we went around the moon, it would not make a pennyworth of difference to me or my work. So this sort of scene is, Conan Doyle comes back to it repeatedly during the Holmes, over the course of the Holmes stories. But there's another theme that is also equally prevalent, and that is Holmes saying things like, all knowledge comes useful to the detective. Even the trivial fact that in the year 1865, a picture by Greuze entitled La Jeune Fille à l'Agneau fetched 1,200,000 francs, more than 40,000 pounds at the borderless sale, may start a train of reflection in your mind. So he's kind of trying to have it both ways, that you can't worry about useless knowledge, but actually you have to know everything. And so it sort of seems like you can't have it both ways. So how do we resolve this? One way I would suggest is to look at something called the Wundt curve. So Wilhelm Wundt was a guy back in basically one of the fathers of modern psychology, a German psychologist in the mid-1800s. And he proposed a general relationship between basically how much you enjoy something, how interesting something is, and how difficult or effortful or uncertain or chaotic it is. And he said the relationship looks something like this. So on the left, if something is easy to predict, if it's fairly not too hard, we don't find it all that much fun if it's too obvious. On the right hand side of the curve, if it's totally chaotic, if it's impossible to predict, hard to do, we find that even less fun. But there's a sweet spot in the middle where there's an intermediate level of uncertainty that we find interesting and enjoyable. And so what predictive processing says is that this sweet spot corresponds to the level of uncertainty or the path where we have the greatest potential to learn about the world and thus improve our predictions. And our brains are then wired to seek out these opportunities to learn about the world. And they're so wired that even a little baby can find it. You can do experiments with 8-month-old infants where if you show them a sequence of shapes, if you show them the same shape over and over again, they get bored and they look away quickly. So you can gauge their attention by tracking their gaze. Same shapes, they look away. If you just show them a random sequence of shapes where there's nothing to learn, they also get bored and look away. But if you show them a sequence of shapes where there is some sort of pattern, then their gaze will stay focused for a little bit longer because they recognize that there's something to learn here. There's a pattern to pick up. And so this is what corresponds to the sweet spot on the Wundt curve. Now you can see this if we go back to the Lost World. There's a quote from Lord John Roxton, who's kind of the swashbuckling explorer in that book. This picture is not of Lord John Roxton. It's a picture of Percy Fawcett, who's one of the many explorers that Conan Doyle corresponded with, and he's thought to be one of the models for Lord John Roxton in the Lost World. Anyway, what Roxton says is, so when he's contemplating the idea of going on this expedition to South America, he says, yeah, besides, there's a sporting risk in every mile of it. I'm like an old golf ball. I've had all the white paint knocked off me long ago. Life can whack me about now and it can't leave a mark. But a sporting risk, young fella, that's the salt of existence. So this sporting risk, I think, is the sweet spot on the Wundt curve. He's saying If it was easy and obvious, it's not interesting. If it was totally impossible and chaotic, that's not interesting. But a sporting risk where there's an intermediate level of uncertainty, that's what's fun. That's what attracts us about the blank spots. And so if we go back to Holmes trying to have it both ways, Holmes wants to know everything, but in reality, he can't know everything. So when he's contemplating ideas like the Earth going around the sun, whether he needs to pay attention to that, I would like to think that he's basically trying to follow his personal Wundt curve. He's looking for the sweet spot, and everyone's Wundt curve is different. So it all depends on what you know, what your goals are, what the context is. But your brain is wired to figure out what it is you need to know that will help you make better predictions. And Holmes is making his own idiosyncratic predictions about what may help him eventually solve a case. Now, in terms of whether useless knowledge then does eventually become useful, this is a debate that's going on at the time when Conan Doyle is writing. There's a very famous essay in Harper's Magazine called The Usefulness of Useless Knowledge, written by a guy named Abraham Flexner. Flexner is the guy who founded the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, this very unusual institution that attracted people like Albert Einstein and Kurt Gödel to come with the promise that they could do whatever they wanted, that they didn't have to do anything useful at all. There would be no teaching, no grants, no explaining why their research was useful. They could just follow their own personal Wundt curve, do what they wanted, and trust that in the long term, this would produce interesting results. And so this was a contested idea even in the early 1900s when Conan Doyle was writing. In the century since then, it's now fallen far more out of favor. So what historians of science would say is that in the early 1900s, science was the great god and technology was a sort of less noble adjunct, a byproduct of science. In the 21st century, it's the other way around. Technology is the great god and science is this sort of esoteric byway that sometimes produces useful things to help technology give us useful gadgets. And so in doing so, we've gotten away from the idea that useless knowledge can eventually be useful. And you could argue, and in fact, I do argue in the Explorers Gene that is connected to what is sometimes called these days the creativity crisis. So there's a whole bunch of lines of evidence suggesting that if you look at scientific papers or patent filings and things, that they're getting less disruptive, less innovative over time. And in fact, you can look at, there's standardized tests of creativity in children called the Torrance tests. And scores on them, if you normalize them appropriately, have been declining since the early 1990s. So I would make the case that actually being willing to follow your own Wundt curve, to pursue what you perceive as the blank spots on the map towards what might seem like useless knowledge is actually really important for creativity and for innovation. So those are the three themes that I wanted to talk about. And looking at them, you can kind of make the case that all of them are perhaps a little bit anachronistic, that these days, there aren't any blank spaces left. We're not encouraged to pursue useless knowledge, and so there's no point in doing any armchair exploring. So I want to just close with maybe a more optimistic note or a call to action a little bit about the importance of exploring. This is a map of London in Conan Doyle's time. You can see that even then, there aren't a whole lot of blank spots on that map. And yet, there's plenty of scope for exploring in a city like London. And, Holmes famously said it's a hobby of mine to have an exact knowledge of London. And when you read about him, being driven through the streets of London and knowing every laneway, every byway, you can only imagine the amount of exploring it took to acquire this knowledge of London. And in fact, how much work did it take? What kind of intellectual feat was this? Well, about 25 years ago in 2000, there was a study on a very famous study on taxi drivers' brains in London. And what they found is that London cab drivers who have to memorize the streets of London, their brains were changed. Their hippocampuses grew bigger in order to accommodate these enormous cognitive maps that they were building. And so you can think to yourself, well, boy, if exploring the streets of London gives me a bigger brain, what happens if I stop exploring? What happens if I go to London and just, as I'm sure I would do if I was in London now, just follow the sequence of, turn left when my phone says turn left, turn right when my phone says to turn right. Well, there's evidence that if you rely on this form of stimulus response navigation, just turning left when you're told to, rather than cognitively mapping the spatial relationships between things, that your hippocampus does get smaller. And a smaller hippocampus is a risk factor for a bunch of conditions like Alzheimer's and depression and PTSD. So there's the potential that there's a cost for not using our brains. And, Holmes, of course, anticipated it. There's a theme again that runs through the books like this: a long series of sterile weeks lay behind us. And here at last there was a fitting object for these remarkable powers, which, like all special gifts, become irksome to their owner when they're not in use. That razor brain blunted and rusted with inaction. So I think it's fair to say that if we don't use our own capacity to explore, it too will blunt and rust with inaction. And even in a big city like, a copiously mapped city like London, there are opportunities to explore and benefits to exploring. Back in 2014, there was a strike on the London Underground, and it was an optional strike, so that whether a given station was open or not just depended on how many workers happened to show up. So you could still take the subway, but you might have to improvise. You might have to go to a different station or take a different line or find a different way of getting there. So some scientists did an analysis of commuting patterns using Oyster card data for tens of thousands of commuters. And they identified a subset of hyper-regular commuters who were always taking the same route to work every morning and the same route home every evening. Then the strike lasted 2 days before service resumed normal. And what the scientists found is that after those 2 days, about 5% of these hyper-regular commuters discovered a new and a better route to work. Maybe they found one that was a little less crowded or a little faster or included a nice walk. And so even in the fully mapped world, a little bit of exploration has the potential to discover better ways of doing things. So the last scene I'll leave you with, I'll go back to the Lost World. At the beginning of the book starts with young Ned Malone wanting to propose to a woman named Gladys. And Gladys puts him off because Ned Malone has not explored the world. He's just an ordinary guy. And poor Ned tries to defend himself. He says, look, we can't all be Stanleys and Burtons. Besides, we don't get the chance. At least I never had the chance. If I did, I should try to take it. And Gladys says, but chances are all around you. It is the mark of the kind of man I mean that he makes his own chances. You can't hold him back. I've never met him, yet I seem to know him so well. There are heroisms all around us waiting to be done. So Gladys is not a very sympathetic character in this book. She's not a good role model. But in this case, I think she's got it right. I think that there are heroisms all around waiting to be done. There are opportunities to explore, even if the blank spots seem to be disappearing. And whether that means taking a trip to somewhere you've never been before, or reading a book from an author you've never read, or finding a new way to get to work on the subway. These are all opportunities, and I think there's no better way of kindling the fire to go out and explore than by reading the books of Arthur Conan Doyle. So thank you very much for your time. And I think we'll do a Q&A, right?
Thank you, Alex. I'll get to you in a minute. Amazing. For now, are there any questions, comments for Alex? Yes. Oh, and I want to remind you that, as Cliff has pointed out, this lecture is being recorded and it will be posted on our YouTube channel in a few days. If you ask a question, you are tacitly agreeing that your voice, not your image, but your voice will be part of the recording. So, okay, now where is the mic now?
Alex, so you talked about blank spaces. I loved it, by the way, fantastic. What are some of your blank spaces? Where are places that you would like to, or things that you would like to explore?
Yeah, I mean, so the truth is, part of the reason I wrote the Explorer's Gene is that I wanted to do something. I had written a lot about endurance, about running. That's my that was my focus for 10 or 15 years. And I felt a real passion, rather than staying in the a defined career path. I felt like I just wanted to try something different. I didn't know why. And so in a sense, writing the Explorers Gene was an attempt for me to try and write a book to explain why I wanted to write a book like the Explorers Gene. So I've done that, and now I'm like trying to figure out, look, I have a million places I want to go. I have a real passion for the North. I'd like to go, I've been a very little bit to the Yukon and the Northwest Territories, and none of it. I'd like to do like a canoe trip that ends in the Arctic. To me, that's just something that really appeals to me. But I'd also, like, as a journalist, I'd like to write about something that I don't know anything about. I got away from that. When I started as a freelancer, I just needed to make a buck, so I would do anything. So I was going to accounting conferences and learning about forensic accounting and stuff, which you don't do voluntarily, but after you've done it, you're like, hey, that was actually pretty cool. And no offense to any accountants in here. But so I'd kind of like to take some assignments that surprise me is the other thing.
Hi, I just mentioned I've been to the Amazon, and I was curious to go. I was with a guide, and but after walking very slowly through there, we had to wear rubber boots and a rubber coat with a hood and goggles and gloves and everything. But after about 45 minutes, I was so nervous. I just wanted to get out. But it was an experience that I was glad I did it.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I think it's worth distinguishing between appetite for the unknown and appetite for risk. So I love going to new places and finding new things. I don't want to die though. So, so I do a lot of whitewater canoeing and or wilderness canoeing rather, with a little bit of whitewater in it. And I have friends that I go with who are less competent in the canoe than I am, but they're much more gung-ho about let's run this rapid. And I'm thinking, I didn't come here to die. I just want to be here, and I'm happy to portage the canoe around this rapid. Whereas some of them are a little more gung-ho.
Thank you very much for that talk. You were mentioning about strange new worlds. I think you mentioned maybe some of us know where this is going to go. And Holmes talking about, does the Earth go around the sun or the other way around? Do you think that's partly why we chase this sort of useless knowledge of sending out the Voyager spacecraft, and what did it find out there? And I don't know if we can use what we find out there, but how fascinating it is, because we ended up being wrong about so many things we originally thought. We thought Pluto was the last planet in the solar system, and then, oh, what's that out there? We found out there was a lot more.
Yeah, there's a fascinating stream of debate in the space exploration literature, which is basically, is it enough? Can we justify space exploration just because it's there, this sort of Mallory type, and just to say, look, we're wired to go there. We're wired to find out because we never know. Whereas there are some people who argue like, no, we need to be able to say like, we're going there because we think we can mine for molybdenum on Uranus or whatever. My sympathies are with those who are just like, we're going because it's interesting, and it might, like you said, we've been wrong so many times before that if we do something, if we discover something new, there's a decent chance it might turn out to be useful in the long run too. And even if it doesn't, it's still pretty cool.
Wonderful talk. Really enjoyed it. The one thing too about your blank spaces is we live in the 21st century. Most of the known world has been explored. The only thing left to really explore is under the ocean. And that's really the blank spot. And that's not only the ocean, but the 7 seas around the world. And then outside the world, as Karen said, in space, the thing too is we go there for knowledge. We need knowledge. We don't have knowledge. What is our purpose? We don't know what our purpose in the universe is. But what we do know is mankind and womankind have an extraordinary sense of wanting to know what's beyond the next hill, what's at the top of the mountain. You know, is there life out in space? Are we the only creatures here? So my feeling too is we need to know. It's knowledge. If we don't have knowledge, then we stagnate and we die as a civilization, I think.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for that comment. And we might say that George Mallory had a point. We're going because it's there. We're back to that because we don't need more justification than that. But we can scratch below the surface and understand that we're trying to understand not just the world but the universe, I guess. And I would say this question of whether there are blank spots in today's world, I wrestle a lot with this. Like, can you feel like you're exploring if someone else has already been there before? And so I would think, oh man, I grew up out by the Humber River where Etienne Brulé was the first European to go by, and I sort of idolized him and imagined myself on the paddling down the Humber like Brulé. And then you read about it and it's like, oh, Brulé was with 15 native people who it wasn't unknown to him. He wasn't the first person there either, and yet it was still an exploration for him. So when I'm on trips in Algonquin Park, I can still feel the joy of exploration because it's unknown to me. It doesn't always matter that someone else has been there before.
Alex, in your book, you tell the story of playing sushi roulette. Do you want to tell that story?
Sure. Thanks for that question. Maybe this is the purest expression of the desire not to know what's going to happen. I at a restaurant in Australia once with friends, we ordered something called sushi roulette, which is, there were 6 of us, 6 pieces of salmon sushi come. One of them has been hollowed out and filled entirely with wasabi. And so then you say, okay, everyone, bottoms up. You pop the sushi in your mouth, and one person suffers very badly. And it wasn't me, thank God. But this was, I still think about this. This was 15 years ago I did this. And why would we do that? First of all, why would we do that? Second of all, why was it fun? Like for 5 of us at least. And there's something about that moment of not knowing what's going to happen. And this is the whole justification for sports, right? Like there's a great quote from a chaos theorist named David Krakauer saying, we're willing to pay a lot of money not to know things, not to know how things are going to turn out. And I think this is all connected to this, the great pleasure, not just in seeking out uncertainty, but in the prospect of having it resolved, even if only temporarily. And for 5 of 6 of us in sushi roulette.
Your theme both answers a question and raises it. Thinking of Joshua Slocum built his own boat to sail around the world. But now to go to Mars, I'm going to need, $45 billion or more. And on your early chart, there's only 5% of the people in the developed world who have this gene that's necessary to do it for no reason other than it's there. But the other 95% of the people have to give me the $45 billion. So you really haven't answered the question well, you've answered it.
Yeah. So there's a couple things I would say to that. First is that the picture of the explorer's gene is, it's an oversimplification in that it's never just going to be one gene that determines how we feel about things, or genes at all. There are going to be multiple. That's one where we have evidence that it matters, but there's undoubtedly other genes that tip us in one direction or another, and also environment, how we're brought up, what our circumstances are that determine how much. So it's never black or white that all people love to explore or don't. But also I would say, go back to this point that we all have a DRD4 gene. So it's maybe that some people feel like 6 out of 10, it's fun to find out what's over the horizon. And some people feel like it's 10 out of 10. So the people who need to fund the $45 billion, it's not that they're not somewhat interested in Mars. It's just they're like, I don't want to go, but here's $5 if that helps you, get on the boat. But yeah, no, I mean, these are, especially when we start talking about 45, the cost of space exploration, these are not trivial questions. It's not enough just to say, well, it would be fun to know what's out there. We have to think carefully about where we use our resources and what the opportunity costs are.
Thanks, Alex. That was an amazing talk. If you have the explorer's gene and you can't go on a journey like that, does reading a book or taking a better route to work satisfy the same receptors?
Yeah, that's a good question. I will say, in writing a book like this, there was a great temptation to go get a bunch of genetic tests and find out if I had the explorer's gene. You know, the narrative sort of writes itself, right? And it gives me a frame. And I chose not to do that. I don't want to know whether I have the explorer's gene because I like exploring, and ultimately, I don't want to let the narrative be written by a gene that may make a 2% variance in how I live. But yeah, so there's a guy, some of you may be familiar with an author named Adam Schultz, who does really amazingly intrepid canoe expeditions across Canada. And his first book was all about his obsession with doing something that no one had done before. So he identified this map in the James Bay, or this river in the James Bay region, which, as far as he could tell from archives, no one had ever canoed down this river. And he went to enormous lengths to get to this river, paddled down it, accidentally went over a waterfall, and was overjoyed because he said, see, this proves that mapping something from a satellite is not the same as actually going there and doing it. He discovered a new waterfall. Now, that's a vision where it's like you can only scratch your explorer's itch by doing something that nobody has done before. His books have evolved since then to become, he's no longer trying to claim to be the first to do something. He's just trying to do some things that are interesting and fun and intrepid to him. And I think that's the model that I'm trying to follow, is that, because yeah, look, I'm not going to Mars, and I'm not even going to the Amazon. I don't like snakes and piranhas either. So I'm trying to find things that scratch my itch. And 11 and a half months of the year, that's going to be reading a book or going down to the Humber River and snowshoeing up a ravine there. And that's pretty good too. But I do try, and I do like to get a little farther afield too. But I think you can get some of the pleasure without having to go to the far ends of the earth.
Alex, thank you very much. It's a fantastic talk. Is there evidence that this gene, this explorer's gene, what is it, DRD4, it was more prevalent maybe 100 years ago in the golden age of exploration when people were actually finding new places than it is today? So
people have tried to do studies on the sort of modern prevalence and movement of DRD4. So one of the interesting questions would be like, did the people who settled places like Canada and the US, the New World, are they more likely to have the DRD4 gene? Because they were the people who were like, yeah, I don't want to stay in this village in England. I want to go to a place that's full of literal blank spots. And the signal's too noisy. You don't know who the control group is. People have moved around too much. The one example of that I found really interesting is there was a huge Scandinavian migration to North America in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And the Scandinavians had very good population records. So they have the list of everyone who got on the ships. So they know who went and who stayed. And what someone found a couple of years ago is that people who migrated, Scandinavians who migrated 100 plus years ago, were more likely to have unusual first names than people who stayed. And the interpretation is that these people came from families where the genetic tendency was not to conform, to want to do things differently from other people. And so the hypothesis is that's why you get the United States strongly individualistic, and that's why you get the strongest sort of social welfare states in the world in Scandinavia, that all the individualists went to Minnesota. So, so in terms of, I don't think the explorer's gene is disappearing. Because it's survived for 50,000 years. And the other interesting bit of evidence, well, it's possible because there was a study on a group called the Arial, which is a group in northern Kenya, which is traditionally hunter-gatherers. But some of that population has settled down to do agriculture. And what they found is that among the hunter-gatherers in that population, those who had the explorer's gene did better. So as measured by they weighed more and had more muscle mass. So they were better fed. So it was good if you're a hunter-gatherer, it was good to have the explorer's gene. Among those who had settled down to agriculture, those who had the explorer's gene were less well nourished. So if you're supposed to be planting crops, sort of wondering what's over the horizon is actually a distraction. It's not that useful. So it's not crazy to think that over time in a settled like agricultural or urban society, the explorer's gene might be maladaptive and might start to drop. But that's sort of speculative. But this opens up a whole different discussion about ADHD is also linked to the explorer's version of the gene. So kids who are struggling in classroom setting, it's maybe that they're kind of wired to want to explore, and that it was something that was very adaptive in a hunter-gatherer context, but is maybe less so in grade 3.
One more question.
Okay.
I really have a question. I just want to make I like to think about useless information. I had a professor in college. There was a big thing about a lot of these politicians saying that all research should be immediately practical. He said there's a usual lag time between research and application of 75 years. And the most famous example of that is, of course, someone you're very familiar with, Sir Michael Faraday, who one of his contemporaries once called his research on electricity and magnetism interesting, but ultimately useless.
Someone asked Faraday, what is the use of all this research? And he said, well, someday Her Majesty will be able to tax it. And he was right, but it was 75 years later. And so that's a big problem with research controlled by governments elected every 4 years, is that they don't have the patience to say, well, let's just find it. Another way of framing that is, if you wanted to invent a television in 1910, what would you do? Well, you wouldn't do what we did, which is let's have Faraday and Maxwell go think about the fundamental nature of the universe. You'd start trying to draw pictures on the wall or something, and you wouldn't get very far.
The story about use of information is about Nikola Tesla. He invented this thing called the Tesla coil, which could store a lot of electricity and then release it all at once. And it was considered a laboratory curiosity until Dr. Edgerton of MIT needed to photograph the Normandy coast at night for D-Day. So every camera in the world that has a flash unit should be paying royalties to Nikola Tesla.
That's fascinating. I hadn't heard that one.
All the research, there was a lot of useless research done by biologists until AIDS came along, and they realized that a lot of that research was necessary to learn how to treat it. So useless knowledge can be very useful.
Well, Alex, I think you can tell by the response how much we've all enjoyed your talk this afternoon. I just want to add that on reading the invitation to today's meeting, I was struck by Alex's extensive credentials. Author, best-selling author, journalist, scientist, explorer, world traveler, adventurer, seeker of challenges, and fitness guru. What occurred to me immediately was that we could have been honored by no more appropriate speaker today than Alex. For don't all those descriptors apply equally to Sir Arthur Conan Doyle himself? And I think we're all agreed that Alex certainly did our hero justice, filling in blank spaces on his cosmic map. Thanks to the two of you, explorers and Renaissance men both, a lost world has happily been found through an unerring GPS system whose coordinates consist of imagination, talent, passion, and perseverance. I was especially fascinated to learn about that mind-body connection and exploration that you described, Alex, in seeking challenges, in the discovery of unexpected romance, and the scientific motivation for pursuing all of them. Alex, thank you so much for your informative and entertaining commentary, for sharing your fascinating experiences with us, and for exploring uncharted territory in the life and times of Arthur Conan Doyle. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Philip Elliott. I am the secretary and the merchandise manager for the Friends of the Arthur Conan Doyle Collection. And today we want to thank Alex for his wonderful talk by presenting him some gifts. If he would just come up, please. Oh, okay. First of all, we've got two nice posters in here for you. One poster is a reproduction of William Gillette being Sherlock Holmes that was published in the Vanity Fair. And for those of you who don't know Vanity Fair, that was a magazine 100 years ago. And the other poster was prepared for our Footprints of the Hound, which is the curse of the Hound of the Baskervilles. So we hope that you will enjoy them. Plus, we have this bag of goodies. And the two things I will tell you about in here, what I feel the important gifts are. We know that you're a really good athlete. So in order to go and help you out, we have bought you a tube. But this tube is from the 21st century. It has a lamp in front of it, and it is powered using a USB thing. But you know what? We're not going to leave you high and dry in the wintertime. We also included a band that once again has a lamp that is powered via USB. So we want you to be well lit when you go out, and warm in the winter and cool in the summer, and well lit whatever. And just to let you know, if you want to exchange that, there is a gift. You never know with people these days. I mean, he may not like the color. I mean, I myself like the orange, but then again, everybody seems to wear black these days. Anyways, and there were some other things in there, and one of them being the play that Barbara Rush wrote that she signed for you before we started this. And we hope you enjoy them, and we thank you very much for your talk and your wisdom on the Explorer Gene. And before I end this meeting, I'm just going to make note of a couple of things. Alex has some of his books over here, which he will sell you and autograph for you. And at the same time, Cliff pointed out, we've got some magazines, we've got Magic Door, that you can pick up there, no problem. Beside Alex there is a bunch of pens that the Friends did years ago. Take as many as you need, but it comes with a warning. They've been upstairs for a number of years, can't guarantee that they still write. So you take what you can. If you find that you can't write, throw it away. Can't write, throw it away. Oh, this is good. But one of the ones, pardon? No returns. Okay, so if you would like to be part of the tour of the collection, what you do is go back to the elevators, go to the 5th floor, and then turn left and walk around the right, and you'll see the collection there. And Jesse will be giving a tour of the collection. If you would like to take part of the tour of the street art on Sherlock Holmes Walk, which will start in about 10 minutes, when you leave the library, turn left and walk along to Asquith for the length of the library. And I believe Cliff said he was going to be your guide there to show you the wonderful installation of the work of art we did last year. And the last thing I have to say is thank you all for coming out today to enjoy our guest speaker's wonderful, wonderful talk. We hope that you've had a wonderful afternoon. You will purchase a book, take home some stuff, please take as many pens as you want. And either go up to the collection or go to the walk. But the one important thing we want you to do is please come back next year for our next Cameron Hollier lecture in 2026. Thank you and have a wonderful afternoon. Oh yeah, sorry about that. Just to let you know, tomorrow afternoon at the Paradise Theater, there is a double feature of Sherlock Holmes movie. One of them is 7% Solution, and the other one is a Basil Rathbone movie. And the movie started at 1:30. So if anybody wants to come with any of us Sherlockians to see Sherlock Holmes and strut his stuff, please meet us at the Paradise. Oh, sorry, it's Murder by Decree. Oh, forgive me.